Joining us now on the Knicks Film School Podcast is a fantastic writer, sees the game incredibly well, and he does 12 months of basketball, which I need a break. I know John needs a break, which is why John's not here. Andrew needs a break. He does not. His name is Mark Schindler. And Mark, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm good. Honestly, I'm getting ready for a break, but we're getting there. I really appreciate you guys having me on. I was telling you before we got on, I haven't been able to listen as much the last couple of months because I've been a little bit slammed, but long time KFS listener. So when you guys reached out to me, I was like, oh, all right, let's go. So yeah, I appreciate you having me on. It's going to be fun.
Well, thank you. And as we were saying before, big fans of yours. Got a great Patreon as well for as little as $3 a month. That's pretty dope. Need that content. So for those of you listening, certainly please check out Mark and the work he does. But let's move on to, I guess, talk about the Knicks for Knicks Film School Podcast. Mark, I'm curious what your thoughts were for the Knicks this offseason after what I know a lot of Knicks fans felt was going to be a step up this past year, then kind of went back down the other way. But yeah, I'd love to hear how you thought the offseason went from your perspective.
I don't mean to fence it too much, but I think it was fine. I know some people in the national media really panned the Brunson signing to a degree, and I thought it was stupid, for being honest. Like, Jalen Brunson's a good player. You can say what you want about how much money it was. I think it was like slightly an overpay, but at the same degree, okay, it's a lot better to have Jalen Brunson than not have Jalen Brunson. And so I mean, like, again, I think some people say that that's too caustic of a way to look at it, but I mean, just given what the guard room has looked like as much as I applaud Alec Burks for being serviceable the last 2 years, that man was like getting run to the bone with how Tibbs was playing him. So just like, I mean, the upgrade from Jalen from what Alec was, like, that's immense. I do think it gives me a lot more questions about how they view IQ and how that's going to work out. But at the same point, like, I don't know, I'd rather see it play out having more talent. It's an A+ in my book, not in terms of that offseason, but you get what I mean. Like, in terms of just like adding talent, I think that was important. I do. The only thing that I think was like a big minus to me is like just not really having all that much more clarity on the Julius front, which in turn makes it less clear for what Obi's path is moving forward. So it's like, I don't know. It's kind of like any team that I'm looking at. Like, I think it's fine. I want to see how things are going to play out in the regular season.
I'd say that there are a large portion of Knicks fans, it seems, who are very eager to move on from Julius, of course, but then there, of course, the portion that wants to see him kind of try to thrive in a smaller role. And I don't know if that's the type of buy-in after having an all-NBA season, if that's something that he's comfortable doing. But I guess from your perspective, is that if you keep Julius Randle on the team, how are you featuring him differently compared to how he has played? Or are you keeping things kind of similarly? Obviously, there's another mouth to feed with Brunson being in the lineup, but is there something you personally, Mark, would do differently?
I mean, I think I could do as much as I want. It's always going to be, does Julius want to do it? Like, I think that was just the biggest thing last year. Like, I don't think that Tibbs's offense is particularly inventive, if we're being honest, but like at the same time, like, what do they have to work with to be super inventive? Like, in terms of actually creating offense, I think it's just really tough. And again, Brunson solves some of that, but he also doesn't fully, which I think that's more why you're trying to lean into RJ. But I do think too, like, we saw some uptick from Julius as the year went on last year. It wasn't perfect, but I do think that there was at least some better signs, especially as the ball was in RJ's hands a lot more. Honestly, like, anything that wasn't last year is an upgrade as far. I mean, like, two polar opposite seasons. Like, the defense, I think, would be the biggest thing, even more so. Like, I think offense, you can at least scheme around it a little bit and work around, maybe having just less sets run through him, which again, like, he's not really going to have a lot of gravity if he's off the ball. But at the same point, like, I think you can at least try and make do with that. But defensively, he went from being a real plus the year before to just like, that was dreadful last year. Like, there were just very few games that I could pinpoint where Julius actually played good defense, which was like heartbreaking to watch. I think that's just the biggest thing that I need to see this year. Like, I would assume that the jumper is going to at least improve slightly because, like, I mean, again, like, two polar opposites. I don't think it's going to get back to what it was as all-NBA year, but I'm hopeful it will get back to at least some midpoint that makes it more stomachable. But again, I think it's just got to be the defense, because he was like a borderline all defense guy. Like, he wasn't quite good enough to make it activity wise, but I thought like just in general, like he was that level. He was really good. So like that needs to get back to being around that area. I just want to see a lot more with him being used. Maybe being used as a role man more, being used as a screener, like stuff that I know you guys and any Knicks fans that I know have been talking about for a year already. So like, it's probably not going to happen, but I would like to see it happen. I'd like to be optimistic headed into the year, but I mean, that's the biggest stuff I'm looking for. It's just frustrating, and I can only imagine as a Knicks fan, it's even more frustrating because it feels like very low hanging fruit stuff, which makes it all the more frustrating that it's not there. I can't remember. There's a Greek god who in Hades is like trapped in I think it's like a lake of wine, and he can't drink any of it. It comes like right up to his chin, but like every time he tries to drink it, he can't swallow. It's something like that. And that's very much how it feels watching Julius Randle play basketball sometimes, which isn't a very dreadful, dreary comparison, but it's kind of where it's at. So
that is a very apt description, honestly. Okay. So Andrew Silas is Dionysus.
Yes. Yep. Yes, that's him.
100%. Yeah. I think the other thing, of course, with Knicks fans is that even those who want Julius to be elsewhere, it's finally feeling like after years of not being able to have a star or dealing with Carmelo Anthony, and will he go, will he stay, and in the no trade clause that he rightfully held above the Knicks because it was given to him, just lucking into someone after 2019 and then just everything, of course, falling. And, one of the things that we often talk about is the idea of pairing Randle and Obi together, how it would be great. And yet at the same time, Tibbs loves 48 minutes of rim protection. And if they're getting crushed on the glass, then it's not exactly the most Tom Thibodeau-ish way of playing. Do you think that they should maybe consider going more small if Julius is still here? I mean, granted, the way I've seen it is you need the way to figure out Obi's minutes has been, unfortunately, 48 minutes minus Julius Randle equals Obi Toppin. But is there any path that you foresee, just even if Julius is still here?
That's a good question. I mean, I think a lot is going to depend on Mitch, Rob. Like I do think, like, again, like Taj is gone, which that's a security blanket ripped away from Tibbs that he can't keep. Which even then, like, Taj had solid minutes last year. It's not like he was bad. But I think, again, like, that's what makes it so tough. Like, I like Mitch Rob in a vacuum, but again, last year was really rough with him. As soon as I saw what he looked like after he did that, whatever the hell whoever his personal trainer was last year needs to be fired into the abyss, because that was a fucking joke.
Still there.
Yep. Are you serious? He's awful. Mm-hmm. Absolutely awful to hear. If you ever see somebody go from 255 to 280 in an offseason and they're not playing football, fire your trainer immediately, because that was unhinged. But I mean, as we saw, like he got a little bit better as you went on, but for the most part, it was very up and down. Like, I thought he was still fine offensively. Just especially in terms of talking about what his role was. But I mean, just drastically big drop off defensively from what he was capable of doing the year before. So like, I don't want to say that I'm like out on the deal that he got. I don't think it was crazy or anything. He's still a young player. I think you can see it working, but I'm just less bullish on it happening on the Knicks now, especially too, like, I feel like I'm not even a Knicks fan. I feel like I'm checking his Instagram story after every game to see what he has to say now about his minutes. So it's like, it's just an odd situation, which again, like, that pairs right in with Obi. Like, I don't think, unless you're getting a version of Julius that is playing the defense he played in 2021, then I don't know that I feel very good about that defensive front court. Like, I don't feel very good about it either way. Like, I think you'd have to be very inventive with it. And granted, like, I think Tibbs is a lot more, at least throughout his career, has been more inventive offensively than he has been defensively. Like, he very much likes to stick to what he knows and what he thinks works best defensively. And I don't think that's going to necessarily work with, playing Obi and Julius together. So I don't know. I think offensively, if things really were able to pop, you could see it working. Especially too, like, Obi down the stretch, again, like in the minutes he got to play without Julius, and when he just got to play like real basketball that wasn't like grinding into the dirt, like, he looked really good. He got to do the things that he was drafted for. it's really tough to see them happening together. But I do think like there are ways it could happen. But again, it's all of the buy-in stuff from Julius.
100%. You know, what you were saying about Mitch, I think is completely accurate. For me, it's, I'm not Mitch's biggest fan. I've kind of seen him as sort of, I believe that he is essentially a Knick until he is not a Knick, because there will be an opportunity to use him in some sort of trade. It's just, you know, down the line, who knows, obviously. But it kind of leads into, well, if you're trading Mitchell Robinson, you're not trading him for a point guard. You just got Jalen Brunson. You don't need to necessarily have someone at the 3, so to speak, and you could be a little bit more versatile, but with RJ. And are you trading for a 4? You're probably not trading Mitch for another 5. You wouldn't necessarily trade Mitch for a backup. It kind of all goes into it. And then I guess where I'm leading with this is with Donovan Mitchell. You know, the Jazz had originally asked for something involving Mitchell Robinson, RJ Barrett, 3 first-round picks. Obviously, Mitch can't go in a deal right now given trade restrictions. But in terms of with the entire Donovan Mitchell conversation, I think Knicks fans are very comfortable saying Donovan Mitchell does not, whatever trade it would be for him, does not put the Knicks into contention status. It's certainly below that. Given that, is it a move? And obviously it depends on the price, but is that something you feel that the Knicks are better suited for right now? Or is there an opportunity you think might be better on down the line, whatever it might be, that could be better than what getting Donovan Mitchell now might look like?
Good question. I think that's something I've thought about a ton. I mean, again, not defensive. I don't have a perfect answer with it. Like, honestly, if it's me, if I could make a trade happen where I'm not sending RJ to Utah, I would do it in a heartbeat to get Donovan Mitchell. Like, I know that there are warts and limitations to what he brings. I also just don't really care. I think, like, to a degree, I do think, and I'm not just saying by Knicks fans, I think in general, like his game has been pretty undersold. Like, I know the defense is really iffy, but offensively, like he made real strides last year as a playmaker. His efficiency, like all the efficiency talk kind of went away from me last year. He really improved his ability to actually get to the rim and finish there. I mean, the 3-point shooting and what he's able to do off the bounce as a creator is legit. Like, again, I think he's more in the Bradley Beal mold, but he is a really good off-ball player. And I think he's capable of playing off the ball too, not just like he won't do it, which obviously we've seen that be a problem with some guys before. Like, just in terms of getting a player that caliber, I think like I could view him and RJ working together. Again, it's not a perfect blend. I think you still want more in terms of like, yeah, I don't want to have a really small backcourt, but again, okay, would I rather have Donovan Mitchell, Jalen Brunson and RJ Barrett, or Julius Randle, RJ Barrett and Jalen Brunson? Like, again, there's levels to it. It all depends what you're putting in. Like, if it's 6 first-round picks back, I think that's insane. Like, no, that shouldn't happen. But I do think it's worth trying if that's there. And it's, again, like I personally wouldn't give up RJ to go get Donovan. Like, you know, again, it depends what all's in the deal, but yeah, it just depends. Like, I think, I mean, that would be the best offensive player that they've had since Melo and his whatever you want to consider his prime in New York. Even as good as Julius was, like, I don't think he was that level offensively. Like, he was really good, but again, it was still like, that was like grinding shit out and making it work for like the 18th ranked offense in the league that year. I think with Donovan and a team, like, honestly, like, there are good players on this team who can make sense on a good team. But again, just actually having somebody who can create a dent in the defense. Like, this is a team that's very much like, it's kind of like watching 1970s Ohio State football, like the 3 yards in a cloud of dust shit. Like, that's how it feels watching this offense, because there's nobody consistently creating separation other than RJ and Spurs. But again, like, it's imperfect. He's still working on it. And I think adding somebody who can actually do that pretty routinely that's just not something you're going to get right now. So maybe something else does pop up down the line. But I would be in on getting Donovan Mitchell.
So one of the things that obviously would be a factor in getting Donovan Mitchell, it seems to be Quentin Grimes. So I'm curious your thoughts on Quentin Grimes, and also essentially Emmanuel Quickley as well, where I get the sense that because Grimes has that extra year of team control, that's something Utah would be even more in favor of. But it seems as though there's kind of this smaller discourse of Grimes versus Quickly, and they're very different players, but it seems like they kind of get evaluated in a way that maybe doesn't best line up with their skill set. So I'm just curious I know you're a big Quickly guy, but in terms of how you would see them as players to retain and as trade pieces, and essentially, Grimes playing off ball is seen as important because if you have more creators, you want someone like that, but it's not like Quickly can't do the same thing. So I'll turn it over to you because I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah. So, I mean, with me, I think I view Quickly as somebody in terms of how I want to build an offense from a roster building standpoint. Like that's something that I want to build around. And I definitely believe in. I know Tibbs has been pretty adamant that he's not a point guard. I think I'm in the mix of, again, like not to be rude, but like I don't care. I don't no, he's not a quote unquote true point guard. But I wrote something about this last year where I think he's somebody to me where, while he doesn't necessarily do full on point guard things, he does a lot of the things that make it matter. He's really good at just kicking the offense in the gear, especially off transition. Like again, like he's not Tyrese Halliburton, but in that same mold of somebody who really wants to push the pace, who's good at getting 2 feet in the paint or getting to the elbows and causing pressure points early in the shot clock. And again, like that's not causing a full on rotation, but it makes the defense move and makes them think. That matters a lot more than, dribbling up with doing Mark Jackson shit, dribbling up with 10 seconds left on the shot clock. That's just not what makes good basketball now for the most part. Like you have to be so good to actually make that work. IQ's not that guy, but again, he doesn't need to be. But I think I look at it almost more as this team probably needs Quentin Grimes more than IQ if Tibbs is the coach. If there's a different coach coming in, which that's not the case right now, I would feel differently. Like, again, I'm much higher on who I think IQ is going to be long-term. And I love Quentin Grimes. Like, I think he's a future all defense candidate, but in terms of somebody who is, at times bending defenses or being somebody who is going to keep making secondary pick and roll stuff happen, I think that can come from him in time, but not to the level I think it's going to get to with IQ. Like the creation stuff isn't quite there for me. But again, like I think in terms of what Tibbs actually wants to buy into and build around, then yeah, if that's part of the trade, then yeah, I would be Grimes over IQ for sure.
Sure. And if no trade, are we starting Evan Fournier? Or are we starting Quentin Grimes? Or surprise, are we starting Emmanuel Quickly?
Man, if IQ, if they did all of this in the offseason and then Tibbs is finally like, oh, I'll start IQ now, I would be just so frustrated. I'd be like, cool, like I'm glad you are, but why? Like, why did it take this? That's
not a point guard, Mark.
Exactly. So yeah, we'll play him at shooting guard now next to a guy who's also not a point guard. But yeah, I think like I would probably start Grimes right now, honestly. Like especially like for what the team does defensively, he's a really good shooter off movement already. Again, like he's budding with some of those creation chops. And when you're a team that's going to IQ makes sense a ton as the backup creator off the bench, like somebody who's going to run a lot of offense off the bench. Also, I want to see a lot more of Obi and IQ together, like doing stuff off the bench where they play really fast and actually play like good basketball. That was the most confusing thing, most frustrating thing last year. I know, like, not to name names, but like I get really frustrated with the people on off are like, oh, this team's like your on off sucks, so clearly you're bad or something like that. Like there's a lot of that, but the on offs were like so clear last year in terms of like watching and seeing how it plays out. Like, oh wow, they actually just like do things that make sense in modern basketball when IQ comes off the bench, and they do stuff with OB2 running in transition. So like, again, I want to see more of that, but I'm getting off on a tangent on how I'd like to see the Knicks actually be built. But yes, it would probably be Grimes starting for me. Fournier, again, with what they're trying to do, it makes almost more sense for me to have Grimes out there. The whole Fournier thing is like, that's another discussion, but yeah.
It is, especially when the Knicks have really like 11 or 12 players fighting for 10 roster spots or 10 rotation spots, excuse me. And even if you take out Deuce McBride, you are still left with choosing between Derrick Rose, Emmanuel Quickly, Cam Reddish, Evan Fournier, Obi Toppin as things stand. And I think the one double-edged sword of if you keep Julius Randle and you're fine with it is, yes, on one hand, you get Obi Toppin probably with Emmanuel Quickly for more minutes, but then you're also suffering by having not as many Obi Toppin minutes as you might like. Not to say that they can't mix and match, but Tibbs seems to, I mean, you see the league more than I do, but does it feel like Tibbs rolls out a lot more hockey changes than other coaches seem to do, where they mix and match more?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I feel like there are not a lot of teams. Like Utah would kind of do it, but it's more like they'd rotate in 3 guys at the same time and do that kind of thing and try and play a little bit differently. But again, like I think that speaks to how the roster is built, but also like Tibbs being just kind of rigid. But yeah, I think that's definitely a fair point. There aren't a lot of teams that do that in full.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was fantastic. Thank you. I'd love to transition to the other league, the one that's happening right now. Very exciting. That being the WNBA. So you cover the NBA, you switch over to the WNBA, and I'm sure there's that, maybe 3 or 4 months of glory where you get to dabble in both at the same time.
Yeah, you want to call it glory? Sure. It's just finding the time is something else, but yeah, no, it's been cool. I love doing it. So it's been great. I wish that league partners would actually like plug it a little bit more, but that's a whole other discussion. But the basketball this year has been fantastic, and congrats to Liberty for making the playoffs. It makes it a lot easier to talk about them here now for sure.
Yes, it does. So let's talk about, I mean, they had a nice season sneaking in, I guess you could say sneaking into the playoffs, right? It was a 4-way tie leading into the last week of the season and winning 2 games against, it was the Dream. Was it the Dream that they won against? Yes.
Yeah. They played a series in the last 3 days. I'm trying to remember. It's been a long week. Last 3 days, playing against the Dream to claim. They ended up getting the 7th spot. The way that the seeding worked out was wonky, but it was basically whichever one of the teams split the games or won both of them was going to end up making it to the playoffs. So yeah, it was. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Oh yeah, well. They were in a really interesting spot. I don't know how many of their games you caught this season, but they were pretty injury riddled. Like Benai Delaney, who I would have considered the best player on the team heading into the year. Sabrina really took another step, but I still think it's close with Benai. But she missed all. I think she only played 6 regular season games this year. Dealing with I want to say she tore her meniscus, so she ended up missing a lot of time. Jocelyn Willoughby was the starting small forward, got injured 4 games in and never really re-entered the rotation because they had trouble kind of reintegrating her. Injuries just up and down. Natasha Howard missed time. I think Stephanie Dolson missed time. Rebecca Allen, who is like one of their key rotation wings, missed like half the season, and she's seemingly always injured. She takes like just a brutalizing amount of contact. I have no idea. Like I'm trying to think of a Knicks comparison, like somebody who just gets hit like an ungodly amount of times. It's her. Like she gets just, if there's any kind of physical contact on court that can cause injury, it's somehow happening to Rebecca Allen.
Kind of happens to Mitch a lot of the times where he falls down and you think, oh, he's dead. All right, time to look for a new center. And then he gets back up and he's okay. So
that's a fair point. Yeah, I didn't think about that. Well, it's interesting with the Liberty because they've played a lot better recently because they've started to get healthy. They've had some luck go their way. But it's kind of a double-edged sword because yes, they're 7-3 in their last 10, but they also had a little bit of an easier schedule. They really only played the play-in teams over the back end of the season. And like even sorting it out when I wrote something this morning on like all of the playoff seeding and how things are looking, like I think their best lineup, like when you're taking, so like Maureen Johannes, who I didn't even mention, was an absolute revelation this year, who was just absolutely awesome for them. Came over from playing in France and just kind of does a little bit of everything and is awesome. Like if you want to get into the WNBA, watching Maureen Johannes highlights is a great way because she, like in the game yesterday, she took a 3 coming off movement off one leg going forward, like just one of the wonkiest shots I think I've ever seen. And she like said after the game, she was like, yeah, I shouldn't have taken that shot, but it switched, so it didn't matter. And she doesn't like speak English super well either. So like her answers are hilarious. Yeah. So like, again, like taking her, like I would consider her one of the 5 best players, and then putting her with the rest of the starters. Like they've played, I think 11 minutes together this year. And like they've absolutely blown teams out in those minutes. But again, it's an 11-minute sample size. So like, what am I supposed to take away from this other than they could be good, but also like, I mean, you have to play the Chicago Sky. So that's like a totally different animal. So they're in a really odd spot. Like I do think like there are probably some fans and people in general who are like, oh, I'd like to see them, miss out and get into the lottery again. But for a team that was in that same position last year, like I just know from personnel standpoint, it's a lot easier said than done to tell your players we're going to miss out on the playoffs 2 straight years. So, it's an interesting balance there. And again, like they're a young team, but also they have vets, they have players who are good now. Like I think that it's imperative for them to work on being that level of team. So yeah, there's my first word vomit, but they're a really fun team. There's a lot of really intriguing players. There's a lot of ways to go in terms of talking about them.
Sure. I went to the game against the Storm. I mean, Superbird was going to be there. Really wanted to see her, and Johannes just exploded. I just couldn't believe how good she was. It's a shame, obviously, the Liberty didn't get to win. It was still cool to see Superbird celebrate. I'm a UConn fan. I know you're a Georgetown guy, so
yeah.
Sorry about that, but yeah. So
it's just, don't remind me. I have like a month still before I have to remember that they play basketball. So cool. Brandon Murray is going to lead us to a 10-20 season. Don't worry.
Well, there you go. Yeah. And at least I get to root for UConn, and especially on the women's side, even though Paige Beckers won't be playing. But
I didn't want to think about that either.
I know. I'm disappointed as well. Wow. But I was going to ask you actually about the tanking versus sneaking into the playoffs thought, because from the NBA perspective, it's the tanking craze, rightfully or wrongfully, it's just there. And I was thinking from the standpoint of with this Liberty team, because is Sabali, she's coming back, and forgive me.
Yeah, she should be back next year. And like, that's what makes it interesting. I was surprised that they took her. Like I got it from a standpoint of like, I mean, in fairness, like they don't really have a ton of roster space to mess around with, especially now that they're healthy. They have like, they're kind of in a place of, trying to play all of their players together has been a struggle, because like, even then, like Sammy Whitcomb was huge in winning that second game against Dallas to close out this last week. But then she didn't play very much in yesterday's game because Maureen Johannes was on fire. Like that's a good thing to have. But again, when you're coming into the playoffs and you're still trying to find out what your best lineups are, like that's a really tough balance to try and find when you're playing do or die games. But Sabally, I really like Niara Sabally. I'm not sure that I see her necessarily as a starter. I think it's going to be, team dependent. Like I think the idea is, to me, like she's very much like in that same mold of Stephanie Dolson, like somebody who can be a playmaking hub. Like she's a really good passer for her size, similar to her sister who plays in Dallas. Like defensively, I'd have to watch a lot more. It's been a minute since I've watched Oregon tape from last year, but in terms of what she brings, like being just like really dynamic role threat, somebody who can, like, you can see automatically the idea of somebody who fits really well with Sabrina Ionescu, who's a super high level pick and roll creator, one of, if not arguably the best in the W. Like that makes sense immediately to me. But in terms of what that means for what they're doing in the draft here, like that's tougher. Like things are going to change over the next year as the season unfolds. Like I think like Aaliyah Boston's probably the shoe-in for the number 1 pick, and she is a post player. Definitely a different player from Niara Sabally, but still like that's more of like, okay, well, you're investing 2 of those picks back to back and you have Stephanie Dolson on a max contract. And it's like, it gets a little funky talking like that. And to be fair too, like the draft is different from the W, which is something I'm still trying to work my head around. Like seeing the number 8 overall pick get cut before the season is like I like the first time I saw it, I'm like, whoa, what the hell is happening here? Mm-hmm. And then I talked to people who've covered the league for free. They're like, no, that's normal. I'm like, that is not normal to me. But yeah, like they should still be in a place where they're going to pick pretty high. Like there are players up there who are going to make sense, and that could be really interesting for the team. But again, like I still think it's in a place of they need to, like obviously they need the talent, but I think New York's definitely in a place where they're in a very different spot from the Knicks, where they actually are like going to be considered a free agent destination. I think the Knicks are headed towards that. That's not meant as shade, but like in terms of like how the league views it, this is the team that can definitely draw draw free agents. So to me, I think it's a lot more important for them to do something in the playoffs and look like a team that's on the rise than, lose the last 4 games and end up missing out on the playoffs.
Yeah. Well, the easy thing is getting players, stars to go to play at the Barclays Center. It's keeping them happy after that. That's where it gets really tricky.
And filling the Barclays Center too. That would be ideal. I've seen pictures of what that place looks like when basketball games are played there. So it's the funniest thing to me. Like I don't have any like dog in this fight, but it's like the most manufactured bullshit rivalry I think I've ever seen in sports. Like it's
100%. But
the games were really fun in 2021, but like it's no.
Yeah. And I have to say, I love MSG. Atmosphere's great. I've been to several Nets games. I've been able to sit decently well because there haven't been a lot of people who have been there. So, but the in-game entertainment it's really lacking just from an experience standpoint. You go to see basketball, but you want to be entertained the entire time. And then the other thing as well is you walk into Barclays, and if you sit in the right section, you can actually look out onto the street, which is just a very odd thing to do when you're at a professional basketball game and you just see traffic. So super weird. But so in terms of back to the W for a quick sec, playing the Sky, do you think that's a more advantageous matchup as opposed to being able to play the Aces, or are the Liberty such an underdog that you feel like it's just a challenge to overcome regardless? I know the Aces and the Sky had the same record, right? They tied for the same seed, and then Aces won.
Yeah. So you're right. They did end up tying for the same record, but I think it is really tough because like this Sky team is just a monster. Like no team has won back-to-back titles, and I can't remember how long. I think since the Houston Comets, so that would be like 2004. So it's been a while. But this team is just, they're deeper. They're more talented by a long shot. They have more length on defense and they know how to use it. They're saying better coach is unfair because James Wade is a really good coach, but like just in general, like I think that any team in the league would struggle to beat Chicago's backups in a 3-game series. Like this team is just really that good and they can do so much stuff lineup versatility wise. They're really athletic. They're the best passing team in the league. But to be fair, other than the first game of the first time they played the season, I want to say the Liberty lost 83-50. It was I think it's the ugliest game I've seen this year. Liberty still struggle with turnovers, but like I think they set the record for turnovers in a game that game. It was close. It was that or the game they played against Connecticut right after. But regardless, it was like over 20 turnovers in that game. And again, that's still been an issue for them, but they've cleaned that up quite a bit. And I do think Sabrina is just so good to a degree where like she's very much in that same mold that we kind of hit with Kevin Durant later this year, where like Kevin like really improved as a passer, and it was enough where like, okay, do you just hope that you can guard him one-on-one, or do you just send a double team and then you get picked apart? Like that's very much where Sabrina's at right now. Like you can just kind of hope the shots don't fall. Guarding her one-on-one, there are very few players who can get away with it, because even though she doesn't, like, actually one of the coolest things I have, because I interviewed Sabrina for a one-on-one earlier this year, and one of the coolest things I think I've ever had an interaction with an athlete, she like willingly called herself a combo guard, and I was like blown away. I was like, I just asked her a question because Crystal Dangerfield came over in a pickup, and she's like a very true point. And that really helped Sabrina because she was like in that game against the Sky earlier this year, she was playing mostly true point because they didn't really have anybody else who could. And it just wasn't working because she really thrives, coming off actions off the ball into pick and rolls instead of just straight up running stuff, coming down. It doesn't seem like it would make a big difference, but it makes it a massive difference. And she was like very noteworthy of that. She's like, yeah, I've been a combo guard my entire life. Like I'm better playing off of another guard. Like it helps me a lot. And that's like just a level of like cerebralness that I just don't think you see a lot from players, which is really cool. Not to say that it's bad, but like that's just a hard thing to see from the outside looking in when you're not watching, like yourself play all the time. But point being, like I think we've seen the like against the Sky in the last 2 games, they played them really close. In fairness, one of the games was after Chicago had some massive travel issues and was on their third game in 4 nights. So like you got to take with a grain of salt that Liberty won that game, to be fair. But they've played them close in the other games as well. And that matters. Like the Liberty have really it's been a lot of, okay, how do we guard Sabrina and how do we deal with what happens on either end? And in the game when the Liberty won, they tried guarding her one-on-one the entire game, playing largely on her left hand. She likes to go left on step backs and side steps. And then it eventually bit them at the end of the game on the last play. But again, like I think it's going to be like kind of toying with and working in both. And it's also worth noting too, like Candace Parker is going to be like way ramped up. Like Candace Parker is going to be playing insane basketball. She was an MVP level player this year still. She's one of the best defenders in basketball. This defense could look very scary for the Liberty, but I do think too, like, again, a lot of it, especially when you're playing a high pick and roll based offense, if you have some shot variance fuckery, anything can happen in a 3-game series.
Yeah.
Like that's what makes it so interesting. Like, especially too with the elimination games, I'm so glad that they got rid of the elimination games because you had like Minnesota was a very, very good team last year. They ended up being the 6th seed, but they were like, I think they were like 24-9 or something like that when the season ended. It was like a very top heavy year last year. So them losing in the first game, like in an elimination game was like, it was bullshit. I'm like, this team, they won like 11 more games than the team that they played. So it was crazy. But again, 3-game series, best of 3, like anything can happen. So I do think that there's definitely a world where it can happen. But I just would not bet on it because the Chicago team is so good. They're like, and especially too, like all it takes is a really bad run of turnovers and they go up by 12. And that's just kind of the game. So it's asking a lot for this team to beat Chicago.
Well, fantastic. Mark, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time talking about the Knicks, the Liberty, W. Do you have a prediction that you're comfortable making at this point in terms of who's winning it all, or you're going to keep that close to the vest?
Good question. Honestly, I have a really good feeling about the Mystics. A lot's going to depend on Elena Deladon's health, but they've been kind of under the radar all year because they struggle when she's out. But this is like the first really healthy stretch of her career since 2019. And she's just about the best player in the world when her game is on and she's healthy. And that defense is just insane. So they have a really tough matchup playing the Storm in the first round, and the Storm looks really good too. The problem is like there are just so many good teams, and the good teams are like insane. But like that's just my gut feeling going into the playoffs that the Mystics are randomly going to pull out a stretch because they kind of need to, just given how well this year has gone for them. So it'll be interesting. But then I have like a big feature coming on a player in Connecticut next week. So I really would like to see Connecticut win it because I was in Connecticut for a week and I got like way excited about them because it was just a lot of good people. But we'll see. I'd imagine it'll probably end up being. I actually have no idea who I'd pick. I would like. Again gut Mystics. No idea. It'll be interesting.
All right, cool. Well, Mark, thank you so much. If you tell the people at home where they can find you, that'd be great.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at MG_Schindler. I have a Patreon as well that is linked up there. Any support is really appreciated. I do work pretty much everywhere on anything basketball. While I try to get into being paid full time, it really helps for anybody who does have the means, and just in general, appreciate any support and really appreciate you guys having me on. This was awesome. It was really cool to be on. I'll be sure to chew out John for not being here, but no, I'm just kidding.
How dare he take a vacation?
What a dick, man. Like,
we had a rule, no vacations. What's wrong with you?
Yeah. But no, seriously, this was awesome. I really appreciate you guys.